Welcome back. This is the Ben Shapiro Show. We're taking your calls at 855-236-3228. That's 855-236-3228. Crystal in California, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Crystal.
Hi, Mr. Shapiro. Thanks for taking my call. I had a question in regard to what Trump was saying yesterday. He indicated that he has total authority over when the states reopen. But he also mentioned that he would work with governments, with the governors of those particular states. Is that constitutional, or would that be under the emergency order that may possibly be in place? I just wanted some clarification on that.
Yeah, so the president doesn't, the emergency order that's in place really allows the federal government to mobilize resources. It doesn't really allow the president to lock down particular areas of the country. It's been governors that have been locking down particular areas of the country, which is why it was the president who announced sort of the 15-day guidelines, which became 30-day guidelines on social distancing and staying at home. That was much more a federal recommendation than a federal mandate, which is why there's still states that have not issued stay-at-home orders, right? The state of Texas has not issued a stay-at-home order statewide, for example. That's because the federal government really does not have the power to enforce anything like that, unless you have basically Congress step in and give him those sorts of powers. So the president does not actually have tremendous national emergency power. And this has been one of the problems for the media. One of the problems for the media is that they've been lying about this all along. They've been suggesting that the federal government has the tremendous power to issue some sort of national lockdown order. The federal government does not have the power to do that. We have a federalist system. We should have a federalist system. Texas should not be treated like New York City. In fact, virtually no place in the United States should be treated like New York City. We've had in the United States approximately 22,000 deaths. 10,000 of those deaths so far have occurred in New York State alone, and the vast majority of those deaths have occurred in New York City. Why? Because people are living right on top of each other. And so areas of the country where people are not living on top of each other, which is to say 95% of the country in a territorial way, why would you lock down in exactly the same way? At the same time, the minute that Trump says, I want to take control of this thing, then the media are like, how dare he try to take control of this thing? So Trump's being inconsistent, but the media are being just as inconsistent. You can count on it every single time. The minute Trump flips on a dime, every single person in the media flips on a dime too. So they go from Trump should take national control to how dare Trump suggest he's going to take national control? He doesn't have the power to do that. So federalism yesterday was their enemy. Now federalism is their friend. Weird how that works.
Correct. I agree with you. But he was actually saying that he wants to reopen them, and he can reopen those states based on his presidency. So my understanding of the Constitution is that, no, he can't actually enact that. It would have to be the states that would reopen.
That's right. He cannot force a state to reopen its economy.
Okay.
Right. He could theoretically, you could have some sort of lawsuit against a state, and then it gets taken to the Supreme Court, for example, for violating federal civil rights. But I think that would be very likely to fail. The federal government does not have the power to do that, barring, for example, let's say that they suspend elections and now they have a non-Republican form of government. Then the federal government can step in. If you lose the right to vote, the federal government has the power to step in, but very restrictive ability for the federal government to step in a time of emergency and say, no, you got to reopen your state. By the way, I don't think that that's Trump's job. I don't think that's the president's job. If you're Andrew Cuomo, you have very different priorities than if you are Governor Newsom in California. Your state has been hit. In California, we've had 700 deaths. In New York, they've had 10,000. Right? California has a population of 50 million. So that is or 40 million. So obviously the state, this is like a perfect example of why federalism exists and is useful. And the bizarre notion that the federal government should take it over in the first place, either to issue like a widespread everybody go back to work order or a widespread lockdown order, is patently silly, Crystal.
Right, correct. I agree. And I also agree with you in saying that New York has so many more cases because they're so heavily populated. People take transit. So you have a lot of just germs circulating within the air. And, they're not also being proactive and being clean and cleaning the streets and doing what they can to prevent the virus from spreading. I feel like
I think that's right. I think that New York is a unique center for this sort of stuff. Yeah, everybody travels via public transportation. You are literally in a small, you're in an airplane every single day, right? Breathing all the same air as other people within 5 inches of each other. You work in office buildings where you're 5 feet away from somebody else. You live in apartment buildings. There is no sky in New York City. Right? The reason LA has escaped this, I'm firmly convinced, is because we're suburban. Everybody lives outside of the urban areas in LA. There's not that many people in heavily populated areas. So that is that is sort of the situation. Again, I think that it is silly for anybody to attempt a national control system over a diverse country the way this is. Crystal, really appreciate the call. Alrighty. Lindsay in Michigan, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Lindsay.
Hi, Ben. I was wondering, would you ever run for a form of office?
That sounds awful. I mean, to be honest with you, it sounds terrible. Having to be on the road that much, and then having to be in government with people who are in government sounds quite terrible. Only if situations sort of forced it upon me would I be even remotely interested in something like that. When I was younger, I was much more interested in it. Now I basically have the dream job. I get to say what I think, and I don't have to worry about the electoral consequences, Lindsay.
Touche. Thank you.
No, I appreciate the call. I appreciate you listening to the show. Clay on line 5, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Clay.
Howdy, Ben. My question for you, and it's kind of an odd premise question, because clearly these are two very different events. But my question was about what do you think is worse overall? And clearly we don't know the long-lasting effects of the coronavirus yet. But overall, on the United States, morally, I mean, the coronavirus has killed so far like 24,000 people. But what do you think is worse, 9/11 for the United States or the coronavirus? Clearly, coronavirus has killed a lot more people so far. But I believe that 9/11 as a whole was, a fairly jarring event for the United States.
Well, I mean, honestly, what was, worse to experience in the moment? Probably 9/11 in the moment. But what is worse to experience over a long haul? There's no question that this is much worse, like much, much worse. I was here for both, and this is a completely different thing in kind. It's like telling people to stay in their house for months on end, telling people if they go outside, they could die, telling people they can never go back to work, telling people that it's a sin to even discuss going back to work, suggesting to people that the federal government ought to pay your salary from now till the end of time and that we ought to fundamentally reshift how we think about the nature of government itself. Like, yeah, this is way worse. This is way worse. And just in terms of the toll that it's taking on the American people, I think it is way worse. At least there you have an external enemy. There was a moment of unity where everybody went, oh, those bastards want to kill us. Let's go over there and let's kick their asses. Like that I think was a lot easier to deal with.
Right.
This has been nearly impossible for the American people to deal with. And it's why you're seeing people sort of lashing out, kind of bashing the bars of the cages that we've been put into. And I think that it can't last for much longer. I think that people are going to demand a solution. I think the solutions are forthcoming. People are discussing them. I think that eventually we're going to end up with, if you're young and healthy, you go back to work. I keep saying this. I think this is where we will be. I think if you're older and vulnerable, you stay at home. I think that we don't do big mass events for a while until there's a vaccine. I think that we reopen the schools. And I think that we go back to eating at restaurants. I think that movie theaters probably end up with some sort of social distancing. There are certain industries that are just not going to come back the same way, but we are not all going to stay home from work for 12 or 18 months or 3 years or something. It's ridiculous. But yeah, I mean, in terms of, is this worse than 9/11? Yeah, it's way worse than 9/11 in terms of the impact on the American people. We were all New Yorkers on 9/11. We are all human beings when it comes to a global pandemic. All righty. Well, we'll bring you all of your coronavirus updates. Also, I'm off the next 2 days. So just a quick reminder, I am off for 2 days, but then I will be back on Friday. You're listening to The Ben Shapiro Show.